All right, hello, and welcome to a quick introduction on using a Mac and Photoshop. Today, you are going to be seeing my screen. Please excuse all of the messy files. I just want to give you a quick overview of the icons that you will see here. First and foremost, in the left-hand corner, you're going to see your menus. The Apple menu is going to be a good one to be aware of. This is where you are going to log out. You can see that says log out Emily Scales. That's who I am. I work for Central Services, but I was an Adobe teacher for over 16 years. This is also where you're going to find go to sleep, restart, and shut down. I will tell you that it is really important for you to log out at the end of every class period so that other students are not able to access your information and your files on your computer. Okay. Everything else, like going into the App Store or the system settings, that is set by Central Services, and that will not really help you much. So I would not even bother opening those up. On the bottom, you're going to see my doc. You can see I have a lot of things going on my doc, but a couple of things that are important to note is the first one is the Finder. Finder is going to be basically your My Documents. This is where you're going to find your downloads. You're going to find your desktop files, anything, and then your applications. This is important to note because applications are not called programs on a Mac. They're called apps or applications. This is where you're going to access all of your programs. You can see that I have a folder down here that allows me to access all of my programs from my doc. If yours does not have this, you're going to want to go into Finder to get that. You'll see that some of them are put in folders. I have a lot of software on mine. So Photoshop, for example, if I double click on here, the icon is available inside the folder. If you want to add an icon to your doc, like Photoshop, I've already got it on mine, but I would simply take this and drag it to my doc and lock it in, which I'm not going to do because I've already locked it in. Red X is going to close a window. The yellow minus sign is going to minimize to your doc, and the green is going to go full screen. I would really encourage you to steer clear of full screen as it takes up a lot more memory when all of your programs are full screen. I'm going to Red X this out and get rid of it. Across the top, you're going to see a lot of different icons and options. You're going to see your date and time. This is to get into your different types of settings, such as display, the volume. It's got your Wi-Fi connections, everything right there. This is a battery because you won't have this on yours. This is a laptop and not a desktop. There is your Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. This is for AirDrop, which you all should not be able to do, volume, and then a few other things that are set up by the district. So just be aware that yours is going to look a little different than mine just because mine's a district laptop. Your trash can is down here. Please make sure, as opposed to what you see on mine, that we keep as much cleared off as possible. I have a lot of folders on mine. That's a great idea for you as well. You're going to go right click. That is, and then you're going to say new folder. It's automatically going to default, or you can add your name to your folder. However, you can also right click and say rename if you need to change it. You can also automatically move this to the trash can or click open. All right, now I've got Adobe Illustrator open. As you can see on my screen, I have the program currently open with a new document window open. I want to start with the basics of starting a new document before we get into the actual interface of Adobe Illustrator. With a new document, you'll see there are several preset categories across the top, including print, where you can determine a letter size, you can do a video, you can do a website, you can even design a preset or a background for your iPad, your iPhone, or even an Android. On the right-hand side, you will see the preset details. This is where you could name your file, which I'm going to choose a letter size for today, and I'm going to save this as my last name, first name. I'm going to be in third period today, and then I'm just going to call this test because it's just a throwaway file that we're going to not save. This is going to show you my width and my height, which you can determine with either pixels, points, picas, inches, feet or inches. This is important to note. I always have students ask why feet and inches, because this is a vector software This means that it is scalable. I can design something in Adobe Illustrator that could fit on a billboard. So sometimes feet is necessary. And the other options here, I would strongly encourage you to stay in either inches or pixels. I'm going to choose inches for today because I think that makes the most sense. I can also determine the different orientation. I can also add multiple artboards. Default is 1, but let's say I wanted to add 2, which I can easily do. I can also add what's called a bleed. That's something we'll talk about as the course goes on. This talks about basically an overhang for the file, so when it goes to the printers, you don't have any white edges, which is a really nice option. Your color mode, CMYK versus RGB. We're going to stay in CMYK because that's best for printing. I'm going to stay in high resolution, and then I could even click more settings if I wanted to, for example, add some spacing between my artboards or organize them differently, which is a great question on the certification. I'm going to go ahead and click create, and you can see it made me 2 artboards, which is really helpful depending on what type of work you are doing. So if I know I'm going to have multiple pages, rather than having multiple files, I'm just going to have multiple artboards. The nice thing is you can add as many artboards up to 100 that you want. Let's take a tour of Adobe Illustrator. On the left-hand side, you will see the toolbar. Anytime you see this little triangle in the corner, it's going to tell me that there are more tools available under that original tool. And anytime it has a keyboard shortcut, it's going to be listed next to the tool. You'll notice that not all tools have a keyboard shortcut, but in my opinion, Adobe adds keyboard shortcuts to the most useful tools or the most used tools. So learning these keyboard shortcuts is really helpful for a lot of reasons, but mainly it makes you a more efficient Adobe Illustrator user. Anytime you hover over a tool, just like in Photoshop, it will give you a preview of the tool, explain what the tool is called, and also provide you a quick little animation. If you click Learn More, it will give you a lot more information, including a video. Across the top is going to be our options bar. This is going to change based around whatever tool that you are currently using. So as I turned on the text tool, you'll notice I got some character and paragraph tools. If I were to turn on the brush tool and use that instead, it's going to change it to things that make more sense for a brush. On the right-hand side, you will see my panels. In Photoshop, panels are very important. In Illustrator, they are essential. We use panels for absolutely everything. I always have my properties panel and my layers panel. In addition, to the right-hand side, I have other panels that I find to be very useful. For example, the color panel, my character panel, which also opens a string of other panels like paragraph and stroke, gradient, and transparency, which I find all useful. The appearance panel, which if anytime I select anything, it will tell me about the appearance of that particular object, along with a few others like artboard. I love the artboard panel. This is really helpful for me to keep my artboard straight, and this is also where I would add additional artboards, either here or with the artboard tool, which we'll get into in another lesson. One of the things to note is every time you add an object on Illustrator, and I'm just going to add a few just so that you can see what I mean, it automatically adds to the default layer 1. Unlike Photoshop where everything went on its own layer, in Illustrator, everything is considered an object inside of a layer. With a layer, you can select everything in that layer. You can also add a new layer, but everything goes on as a separate object automatically. You do not have to create a new layer to use the brush panel, for example. It automatically creates it as and you'll see it says right here, as a path. Illustrator works off of vector, which means everything is a vector object, which means it can be manipulated and moved because of what these are called, which are anchor points. These are handles which control the curve, which we'll learn about in the pin tool worksheet. But it's really important to note that nothing here is made up of pixels. This is not a pixel-based software. If you close down a panel that you need, the window menu is where you're going to go back to. Please note that everything is in alphabetical order, and it's a good idea to know what the different panels are called. For example, if I were to have closed down the appearance panel, I want to know that that's called the appearance panel so that I can return to it. Across the bottom, you'll see more information about the zoom of your board, and you can change these this way. In addition, you can hit Control plus or Control minus to zoom in or zoom out. That's important to note. Please note that undo is Command Z, but redo is not Command Y. And I'm going to show you what it looks like. This is called outlines. So if I were to have things in color, for example, which let me put this in color so you can see what it would look like. I'm just going to put this in color. And I were to do Command Y, everything goes into what's called outline mode. So everything is just a very thin line, not denoting color, and that's to help us line things up better. So if you get into that mode by accident, Command Y again will get you out of it. Undo is Control Option Z. And that's called step backwards. And you'll see it's not activated for me because I moved into something that they can't undo. So there's undo, and then I'm going to redo it. Command Shift Z lets me go backwards and forwards. One of the things I want you to note is my toolbar may look bigger than yours. That is because I have what's called on the advanced toolbar. This is the basic toolbar. I would encourage you to automatically edit your toolbar and change to the advanced toolbar, because some of the tools that you'll need or want to learn to use, like the shaper tool or the shape builder tool, are only available on the advanced toolbar. On the certification, you will find that there are things that you have to have the advanced toolbar on for, so it's good to know how to turn that on. One of the other things I want you to know is that you can click on an object to select it. But I want you to note that I clicked here in the middle of this square and it's not selecting it. That is because this is a see-through. There is no fill on this object. So I have to select the actual stroke or the edge of it in order to grab it. So if I want to change this to a white fill, now it is full, and you can see that it has got a white background to it. That's an important distinction, because I think students sometimes don't realize that if there's not a fill on it, there's nothing there to grab. I can also click and drag in order to grab multiple objects at one time. And I also have something called grouping, which is really helpful. A group, and you can get to it from Object, Group, makes it so that anytime I click on one thing, everything moves together. You can also right click to get this, and you can see my group now lists as ungroup, which means I can turn that off. If I've grouped objects, so I'm going to group these two again, that is also Command G on your keyboard. You can still change things individually. You have to double click on something, and now you're in what's called isolation mode. If you'll notice, I now have a new bar up here. This means that I can change this particular object, or I can click on this one, which I'm going to do, and I'm going to change that to blue, and I'm going to change this one to red. And when I hit escape, which is what I'm going to click to get out of isolation mode, that bar goes away, but they're still grouped together, which is really convenient if you're wanting to do a very complicated design and ensure that everything moves together. I'm going to open up a file that's more complicated to give you a difference of what a bigger layered object looks like. I chose to open something that's very complicated for you to see the variety of things that you can create in Adobe Illustrator. This is a file I call this is my realistic apple, where I took an image of an apple and duplicated it to look as realistic as I could. This object is grouped, and if you'll see, if I double click, there are a lot of objects here that can be manipulated. But I also wanted you just to see an example of what a really, really detailed drawing could be. So in here, I'm going through my layers, and I have layer 8. And then when I open this up, I want you to see all of the different pieces that I have available on this particular layer. Please note that this is just the freckles on the apple. For me to get into more of this, you'll notice that I have everything very organized in my layers so that I can get to everything that I want. I'm going to ungroup just for a second so that you can really get a true idea of how many layers are upon my object. So I'm just going to keep scrolling, and you can see there are lots and lots and lots of objects here. And if I arrow down, I'm going to get out of here. So the reason I show you this is because I want you to be aware that a layer can be very, very large. An object can also be very, very large. So it's really important to make sure that we're grouping things effectively so that when we're working in an object, there we go. Now I was able to ungroup it all. You'll see that there's a lot of information here. On the layers panel as well, I want you to note that I can turn layers on and off by hitting the eye. I can also use this to select individual objects on my object. Now this layer is gray. That's not very helpful. So I'm going to double click right here in this side, and I'm going to change it from gray. Let's do yellow. I think yellow is going to create a lot more, visibility, and you're going to be able to see all of the different pieces to my object. You'll see I have a lot of extra layers in here, and I don't quite know how I got so many. So I'm going to highlight all of these, and I'm going to trash them. They're now gone, and I don't have that as a distraction for what I'm trying to do. So I can now click on all of the different individual pieces, and you'll notice in my layers panel, for some reason, they're not showing up. I'm not sure why, but everything is considered clickable, and you can select and move all of the different pieces at will. While this looks like a very complicated background shape, it's actually one simple shape that allows me to manipulate what's called transparencies. I've got gradients, and then this is called a color or a gradient mesh. So you can do a lot of really neat things. And then like this, I'm looking at this again. I don't love this. I think that that looks a little funky. So I can also go back at any point and make changes. For example, I am going to add a little bit of a blur to this because I think that's going to look nicer if I add a little bit of a blur. And you know what? I was right. That looks much better and a lot more realistic than that harsh line. I just want you to be able to see some of the really neat things that you can do in Illustrator, such as this flat design activity that I did with my students, showing how to draw things that actually looked like my computer that was on my desk. This paper cutout where you can see lots of depth. And this really beautiful gem that uses gradients and uses lots of really sharp angles. Adobe Illustrator can create pretty much anything that you want it to create except for really clear photographs. That is not what it's intended for. Once I've finished changing a design, creating a design, anything like that, and I want to make and save my file, I want to make sure that everybody's aware of the difference of saving files in Illustrator. So just like any other file, we're going to do save or save as. If we do a save as, it's going to pop up like this. This is completely normal. We're going to always say save to your computer. We don't want to save to Creative Cloud. And I think that's really important as you're learning, just because we want to make sure that you can get to everything. So I'm going to do save as just like I normally would. So I'm going to do scales, Emily, 4th period, and then I'm going to call this gem. I'm going to choose the format. In the format, you're going to see Adobe Illustrator, which is AI. This is our standard file type. This is a project file type so that I can edit and change and manipulate things later. You also see EPS, which an SVG down here, allow it to open up in any vector software. So if you're sending it to somebody who, say, uses a program called Corel Draw, if you send them an SVG, they can still open and change your file. PDF is going to obviously create an Adobe PDF file, which is just a collapsed flat paper basically. But I would strongly recommend doing two things. One, always save it as an Illustrator file so that you can get back to it later. And I'm going to click save. This panel is going to pop up. That's completely fine. Just leave everything like it is and you're going to say okay. If you hit cancel, it will not save. Let's say though I want to save this as an image file. I'm going to say file, export as, and this is going to pull up a different export panel than maybe what you've seen in Photoshop. I have my format here, and you're going to see a lot more choices this time. I personally prefer PNG for any type of Illustrator file that I'm moving into an image. A PNG is going to give us a transparent background, where a JPEG, for example, which you're probably very familiar with, will not. You should also see that you can save it as a Photoshop file. I'm going to choose PNG. This option right here is also good to know about. You can do artboards, or it will automatically save it just the object itself. I want to show you the difference. So I'm going to say export without using artboards. And you'll notice I have a choice of resolution and whether I put a background color or not. If it's a JPEG, you don't get this option. I'm going to leave it as transparent because I want you to see the difference. And then I'm going to say okay. In theory, there it goes. Now, if I open that same file and I drag and drop it into my Photoshop, if you'll notice, there's no background. It comes in as an object without any type of background. If I instead export as a JPEG, or I use artboards, either way, when I use the artboard, I can choose which artboards. This one only has one, but if I had 100 artboards, I could choose just the individual artboards that I want, and it will save it as individual images. This time I'm going to click export, and I'm going to say replace, and it still puts it on a transparent background, but the difference is I'm going to do white this time because I want you to see. It is going to exactly export everything on the artboard, including the artboard size and shape. So this time you'll notice that it's the exact copy of what is there. That's an important distinction. This is also important to note that when you are using a file like a worksheet, like the pen tool worksheet, for example, if I were to say file, export, export as to turn this in as a JPEG, for example, and I want to click use artboard so that I ensure everything is included, I'm going to save these to my desktop as Scales, Emily, second. This time when I hit export, you notice I have an all or a range. If I just wanted page 1 and 3, I would type in 1, 3. I'm going to leave it as all because I want you to see what happens. I'm going to click export. It's going to ask me a few questions. You're just going to say, okay, RGB is fine. Quality 10 is great. We want it to be nice and readable for our teacher when we go to turn things in. I'm going to shrink this. And one of the things is, here's what I want you to note. It turned in and created 3 different pages, 3 different image files based on the number of artboards. If I had 100 artboards on this worksheet, I would get 100 different individual files. So please make sure you know when you export a file from Illustrator with artboards, you are going to get multiple images and not one. So that's an important distinction. I hope this really helps give you a better understanding of using Adobe Illustrator and gets you excited for all of the things that you can create.